What's going on, guys? The Pleiades Payout 6 just wrapped up, which is another online hat format tournament that's held through the Hat Alliance Discord server and then played on Dueling Book. This is one of the cooler events simply because you have the chance to actually win money by topping this event. Usually, I think it's first and second place end up getting whatever the prize pool is, kind of split amongst them. It might be more depending on how many people actually enter. I'm not entirely sure for this one, but anyways, there is a money payout for this one, which is pretty cool. And anyways, if you guys are interested in actually playing in events like this, or just other hat format online events, in the description you can find a link that you can go to and actually join the Hat Alliance Discord server and find out when there's other hat format tournaments, or just have discussions about the format and deck building and all sorts of things hat format. But anyways, here in front of us, again, I am going to be reviewing this event, looking at what decks actually entered, looking at the topping deck lists, which I believe for this event, I have the top 5 deck lists, which is sort of weird given that this event had, I believe, only 16 players. And while that doesn't seem like that much, it's actually slightly up from what, the Pleiades Payout usually gets. Usually it's somewhere between like 12 and 14 players, so this actually is slightly more. There's also a bunch of like decently sized hat format tournaments that are going to be going on soon, or even right now there is the Moral Tech Monthly that has over 60 players going on. So that's kind of one of the reasons that this one ends up being slightly smaller. But anyways, let's get into this event, what actually entered, and look at those deck lists, see if there's any cool tech cards and, the usual stuff like that, as a lot of people were actually, kind of waiting for me to do another one of these videos because there was some problems with the H.A.T elimination that took place not that long ago with the deck lists, so I didn't really do a review on that. But anyways, like I said, there were 16 players that entered this. They all joined, and let's see what they played. There were 3 Geargia, 3 Artifact Trap Tricks variants, 2 Artifact Gravekeeper decks, 2 Spellbook, 1 Mermail, 1 Artifact Thunder, 1 Kokimiru Fire Fist, 1 Fire Fist Trap Tricks, 1 Constellar Artifact, and 1 Mythic Ruler. So, a pretty decent spread of decks. A lot of this is somewhat expected. Obviously seeing, I guess in theory that one of the larger slices is Artifact Gravekeeper, that's kind of interesting, as I feel Artifact Gravekeeper hasn't seen as much play recently, but again, for a smaller event, it sort of makes sense. Obviously, we're seeing that there was no Lightsworn Ruler, there was no Infernity, there was, 1 Mermail, I believe. And other than that, I mean, it kind of makes sense as usual to see a lot of Geargia and a lot of Artifact Trap Tricks. There was also, 2 Spellbooks, so that's always nice to see. Not many ruler decks. What was it? Just the 1 Mythic. So no Hieratic ruler or anything like that. And also not really any rogue. There was no like other slices or anything like that. So a pretty straightforward event, if I'm being honest. And yeah, nothing that really stands out too much out of this. You guys can let me know if, what your opinion on that is. But let's actually look at, what made the, I guess, top 5 for this event. And so yeah, let's go take a look at that. So in first place, it was Geargia. And this, I'm pretty sure, was a Geargia hands list. In second place was Spellbook. Third and fourth place was another Spellbook deck and also a Artifact Trap Tricks deck, which I'm pretty sure this was a hat build, so the hand Artifact Trap Tricks. It wasn't like cat or just, Artifact Trap Tricks as a whole. And then in what would I guess fifth place was Geargia, and seeing the name here, this is the person who I believe won the last Moral Tech Monthly or H.A.T elimination. I don't entirely remember off the top of my head, but they were on Geargia, so, it looks like there were, 3 Geargia decks, and 2 of them made the top 5. There were 2 Spellbook decks, and both made it into the top 5 here, and then also one of the Artifact Trap Tricks variants made it, so unfortunately no Mermail, none of those Gravekeeper Artifact decks made it, or any of the other Singleton decks, but let's actually go and take a look at that first place list. So here is that first place Geargia hands list, and just quickly, glancing over this, there is a lot to talk about because how I usually say that Geargia doesn't have a lot of, variation to it. Usually it's a pretty straightforward list. This one I can tell already has a lot of things that you wouldn't usually see in a Geargia hands list or Geargia in general. Real quick though, I'm going to go over the basic Geargia lineup because from a quick glance, it looks like that's at least the same, which is going to be your 3 copies of Arsenal, your 3 armor, your 3, that's Accelerator, my bad. 3 copies of armor, 3 Accelerator, 3 Arsenal, and then also the 3 copies of MK2, the 1 Geargiano, and then the 3 Geargia gear. Now, where it starts to change a little bit is they chose to play 2 copies of DD Crow and 1 copy of Max C. We did see this in the last tournament review that I had covered, that there was someone who chose to do the same exact thing who also ended up winning that event. And how I usually say, Geargia Hands is a deck that's going to play 3 hand traps in the main. Part of the reason is because they are playing the hand, so making space for stuff can be a little bit difficult. And so usually they would play like 3 copies of Crow or 3 copies of Max C. Occasionally you'll get like a 2 and 2, but it's kind of weird to start seeing this pop up a little more. Obviously here they're playing 2 copies of Crow and 1 Max C, which is still adding up to 3 hand traps. It's just kind of a weird combination of hand traps, but I guess that's kind of cool. And then obviously, again, you have 2 Fire Hand and 2 Ice Hand, which is also very standard. Now, moving on to the spells, I see 1 copy of Book of Moon, 1 Dark Hole, 2 Forbidden Chalice, and 2 Forbidden Lance, 1 Mind Control, 1 MST, and 1 Soul Charge. So, first off, I don't think I've almost ever seen Chalice and Lance in a Geargia deck, at least in the past year or so, and this kind of indicates a couple things. It means that they were really trying to have a better matchup against the Artifact Trap Tricks decks, or in general against the decks that, when going second, you really want to be able to have your Arsenal resolve if you want to be able to summon it and tribute and get into your armor. And also you don't want your opponent, say, going Sanctum and summoning a Moral Attack and then popping your armor or anything like that. And so things like Lance or Chalice and Lance kind of help you play through back row, and it also helps you play really well into the artifacts. So that is actually really, really cool to see. Also, just 1 MST it feels a little weird, but at the same time, you are playing things like the Ice Hands and stuff. So that's just kind of another way to be able to pop back row. But even then, 1 feels a little weird. 1 Soul Charge isn't the most uncommon for Geargia. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 2. So that's not the strangest thing, but I guess the main thing that really stands out is just these Chalices and Lances and the 1 copy of MST here. And moving on to the traps, there's also a little bit of variation that I think is kind of cool. We see 1 Bottomless, 1 Torrential, 1 Warning. That's all very standard. Obviously, as I mentioned, the 3 copies of Geargia gear, and then also the Compulse, I guess I should throw in with the basic staples. But then they played 1 Call the Haunted, 2 Debunk, and 1 Fiendish Chain. So if you guys know and have watched a lot of these videos from me, usually Geargia is going to play 2 to 3 copies of Breakthrough Skill and 2 to 3 copies of Fiendish Chain. So seeing just 1 Fiendish Chain here, again, it really minimalizes the trap lineup, and it kind of makes sense not to play the Breakthroughs or Fiendishes as much if you're going to be playing Chalice, though obviously that is a lot less monster negation. But at the same time, I guess it does kind of help you, again, play a little bit better going second. The 1 Call the Haunted is really interesting, and the 1 Fiendish, I guess in terms of why is it just those as one-ofs? There could be a ton of different reasons, honestly, and being able to Call the Haunted, say, your armor if you really need to, or same with your arsenal, or even one of your hands just to be able to then crash into something. That can be pretty cool too. And then again, if you're not really maximizing the potential of, your trap lineup in terms of, being able to negate monster effects and stuff with your fiendishes and breakthroughs, then I guess just the one fiendish is just if you have it, you have it. If not, it's not a big deal. And also a lot of that stuff will make so your deck isn't as susceptible to things like Exciton Knight, because, the spells will go to graveyard right away, whereas Fiendish Chains are going to stay a little more on board. Maining the debunks isn't like the crazy most unheard of thing. I, again, have made a video talking about debunk in the main, and I think it's a very strong card. It just hits so many things, whether that's, any graveyard effect, for example, the hands or hand traps or just different stuff like that. So it is kind of refreshing to actually see that. Moving into the side deck, we see the one Cycle Reader, very common, and the other two copies of Max C. I always liked seeing the whole playset made, and then also they're choosing to have two copies of Flying C, which usually, I think this card is really, really strong, and it's needed for a ton of different matchups, especially, when there is Infernity in the format. It's just one of your better options, and it also works great against decks, for example, like Evil Swarm, even though this deck doesn't care as much for it. But, seeing that you are playing hands, being able to stop your opponent's dwellers is extremely nice. Then they are playing one copy of Thunder King. Thunder King, it's my favorite card in the game, but in general, I feel like this card, it is extremely strong, but I feel like this list kind of is somewhat reminiscent of like a Vegas format list. Obviously, in Vegas format, we didn't have the hands or Soul Charge, but I feel like Thunder King was a lot more common in the Vegas format type builds. Same with like the Call the Haunteds and stuff, though I personally have played a couple different builds that do play that and I really like it, but it's cool to see that. After that, we do see the other copies of MST, which is always nice to see. Certain matchups you just want to have as much back row removal as possible. And then the one copy of Dimensional Fissure is extremely common in Geargia. Now, looking at the traps, there is a little bit more variation. Obviously, the Soul Drain and Macro are very standard, but then what is a little less standard is Gozen. Gozen barely sees any play in Hat format. It would be interesting to hear their opinion on, why they chose this. Obviously, it does have times where it can shine, though at the same time, I feel like if you are choosing to play this, you're probably siding out the hands or something, just because it can conflict a little bit. But at the same time, with Gozen, I'm pretty sure you can still have these set, so then when your opponent destroys them, you can at least like destroy a monster or destroy a back row, but you probably wouldn't be able to actually go and summon because you already would have one attribute, given, you would have something like a Gear Gigan X or something on board in an example like that. But kind of cool. Then 2 copies of Iron Wall and 1 copy of Rivalry. So just kind of floodgates in terms of traps in the side deck. So not playing any Blackhorns or anything like that. Obviously, they are maining the Debunks, which is usually a side deck card for a lot of different decks. And nothing like DNA Surgery or anything like that usually decks like this would play for Spellbook matchups or Bujins or anything like that, which now that I think about it, I don't think there was any Bujins that entered as well. So that is also a little bit different. Now for the extra deck, again, Geargia is at least the deck, even looking at a variant that's slightly different from a standard build. The extra deck is going to be pretty standard, I would say, and that's 1 Dweller, 1 copy of Emerald, 1 Direwolf, 1 Exciton, 1 Cowboy, 3 copies of Geargigan X, 1 copy of Ghostrick Alucard, 1 101, 1 Ragnazero, 1 Black Ship, 1 Rhapsody and Berserk, 1 Tempo, and 1 Zen Mains. I'd say Tempo is the one outlier that can kind of be swapped out for almost anything. I would say a lot of people will go with like Soul of Silver Mountain or something like a Acid Golem. But again, there have been times where Tempo does see a little bit of play. I'm pretty sure this is the one that can detach material from opponents' cards. So being able to, detach a material quick effect basically from an opponent's 101 or something like that can be kind of nice, if I'm remembering that correctly. I know one of the Djinns do that, and I'm pretty sure it's this one. But yeah, overall, it's decently standard in terms of the extra deck, but lots of variation in terms of the main and side deck, and I do like to see that, and obviously it did work out for them. So, the format is always evolving, so it's very nice to see that. But anyways, let's move on to the second place deck list. Second place was obviously Spellbook, and going back to, kind of standard stuff, Spellbook is a deck that is, for the most part, a pretty standard build. There might be small variations, like some people choose to play like a second copy of Life or a second copy of Power or something like that. But I would say the biggest difference is probably going to be this trap lineup that we'll talk about in a minute. But in terms of the main deck, they're playing the 3 copies of Crow. This has been somewhat standard. Some people like to go with Max C's, some people like to go with Crows. I think we've seen a lot more decks topping with the Crows in the main versus the Max C's. But anyways, after that, we have the 3 High Priestess, 3 Justice, 3 Blue Boy, and 3 Temperance. For the spells, we see the 1 Book of Moon, 3 copies of Crescent, 2 copies of Eternity, 1 Fate, 1 Life, 2 copies of Power, 3 copies of Secrets, 2 copies of Wisdom, 2 copies of Master, 2 of the Tower. Now, looking at the traps, they're choosing to play 1 Bottomless, 2 Breakthrough, 1 Compulse, 1 Warning, and 1 Torrential. Getting into kind of what I said about the traps, some builds will like to play things like Trap Trick Trap Hole Nightmare as their terms of monster effect negation, while others will go with something like a Fiendish Chain. So seeing, the breakthrough skills, it's not unheard of. I'm pretty sure we've seen this exact lineup top in the past. So it's not like the worst lineup. It's, whatever the person's preference is. And the other thing is, as we've started seeing Temperance in the main deck as kind of the standard build, we have been seeing a lot less duality and things like that, which personally, again, I've always said it, that I'm kind of have mixed feelings with the dualities and stuff, especially because it kind of contradicts with the Crescents and stuff. But from what I'm, seeing a lot more, the Temperance is kind of the standard, and it puts more pressure being able to just get the High Priestess out of deck and apply a lot more pressure, which is always nice to see. Looking at the side deck, they chose to play 2 Flying Sea, 1 Kaiku, 3 Max C, 1 Dark Hole, 3 MST, and for the traps, they went with 2 Debunk, 2 Rivalry, and 1 copy of Soul Drain. Rivalry, I feel we haven't seen as much often, but obviously in this event, even the Geargia player was siding 1, so it's kind of cool to actually see that this card's coming back. There's not a whole lot of decks that can really take advantage of it. I know like Sylvan is another deck that sometimes will even choose to main it, but seeing this in the side, it's not like the most unheard of because obviously, again, Spellbook is a deck full of just spellcasters. So kind of cool to see that, and it's always nice. Besides that, the side deck is extremely straightforward. The extra deck, they are playing the 1 Daigusto Phoenix, 1 Downard, 1 Gotchi, 1 Gaia Dragon, 1 copy of Ghostrick Alucard, 1 Succubus, 1 Herald, 1 Hierophant, 1 Leviair, 1 Dracosac, 1 Big Eye, 1 Nightmare Shark. I feel that's not as common to see in general, but it's basically like the Heartland Draco, the next card, but in the rank 3 type of Xyz monster, 1 copy of Shining Elf, and then the 1 Soul of Silver Mountain, obviously having the kind of benefit of being able to bring back your Temperance, but also it just has really high defense and stuff, so that's kind of cool. But overall, nice build, and let's move on to the next one. So here we have the H.A.T deck list, and the one big thing that stands out to me right away is usually H.A.T doesn't really main the hand traps as often, though it's usually, if they do, I think it's like 2 Max C is kind of what a lot of people will go with, but here we are seeing 3 copies of Max C in the main, which is very cool. Besides that, we see the 5 basic artifacts that a lot of people will play, which is the 1 Beagle Tack, 3 Moral Tack, and the 1 Scythe. They are choosing to play the Scythe, which H.A.T is one of those decks that some players like it, some players don't. It kind of, to me, feels like almost like Cat in a sense when they do actually go and play the Scythe, which I'm a big fan of that deck, so kind of cool to see that besides that, I see 2 Fire Hand and 3 Ice Hand. So obviously, Hat as a whole has cards like Moral Attack, which can very easily pop monsters. So they're putting a little more emphasis on being able to clear opponents' back row, and that's kind of what you can get the assumption from when you see decks that are playing one hand in more copies than the other. So obviously, Ice Hand being able to pop back row means that they're a little more wanting to see the back row removal. Besides that, they're playing a very standard Trap Tricks lineup, which is just the 3 Mermail and 2 Dianea. For the spells, they're playing obviously 3 Ignition and 2 Double Cyclone, nothing crazy there, the 1 Dark Hole, and 3 copies of Duality. They're also choosing to play 2 Soul Charge. Some people like 2, some people like 1. Personally, I'm on team 1, but at the same time in Hat, you do have more monsters than Cat. So playing 2 isn't completely unheard of because you have more ways to actually summon back your monsters, or you'll see more monsters in general, I guess I should say. For the traps, they're playing 3 Sanctum, 1 Bottomless, 1 Breakthrough, 2 Call the Haunted, 1 Compulse, 1 Warning, 1 Torrential, and 1 Trapple Nightmare. That's all extremely standard. I'm pretty sure that's basically my trap lineup that I play in my build, except I might play 1 extra trap, like a Wiretap or something like that. But overall, very cool list. Again, you don't really see the hand traps as often, or like the off ratio. A lot of times you'll see like 3 and 3 or 2 and 2 for the hands, but very nice to see, very clean. In the side deck, we see the 2 copies of DD Crow, the extra Fire Hand. So in the more grindy matchups, you can kind of just throw that in there. 1 Mind Control, 2 copies of Nobleman, and that's actually it for the monsters and spells, and the rest is just a ton of traps. They're playing 2 Acid Trap Hole, 2 Blackhorn, the second copy of Breakthrough Skill, 2 Debunk, and 2 Wiretap. So actually, yeah, no, that's pretty cool to see. Some people like MST in the side, but obviously if they're maxing out on the hands and they're already playing the Ignitions and Double Cyclones, then that's completely fine not to play those. Honestly, really solid lineup for the side deck as well. In terms of the extra deck, they're playing 1 Dweller, 1 Durendal, 2 Pleiades, 1 M7, 1 Daigusto Emerald, 1 Exciton, 1 Cowboy, 1 copy of Gaia Dragon, 1 Lavalval Chain, 1 101, 1 copy of Ragnazero, 1 Black Ship, 1 copy of Volcasaurus, and 1 Zenmayo. Really clean, really like that a lot. Some people have been a little more lately playing the Heartland Draco over the Cowboy, but in general, nothing looks off here. There's nothing weird or unheard of, so let's go on to the next list. So here we have the other Spellbook deck, and rather than going through every card as usual, I'm just going to go over what the differences in the other list that actually topped was. So obviously this build is choosing to play the 3 Max C while they are siding the Crows, so that's like the biggest change I would say in terms of this list for the monsters. Everything else is exactly the same, the 3 Temperance, 3 Priestess, and everything else. In terms of the spells here, they are choosing to just play the 1 copy of Power, how I mentioned before, and in its place, I think they're just playing an extra trap card. Let me go back to the other one. They were playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and in this one, they're playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, they're playing the same. So what card is actually different if they dropped one of the copies of Power here? Let me go back to this one real quick. You guys will have to let me know in the comments because I guess I am just completely missing whatever that might be. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure looking at it real quick. It's probably like right in front of me and I'm missing it. The other big thing to note is they are on the 3 copies of Fiendish Chain, how I mentioned that some builds will do that. So it's kind of cool actually to be able to show you that 2 lists top and they're both playing slightly different variations of the deck. While it is extremely similar, those tech cards kind of show you both sides of what people consider to be standard at the moment. Oh, here it is. They're actually playing 3 copies of Wisdom. So kind of putting more emphasis on the trap cards while the other build was only playing 2 copies of Wisdom. 3 is a little different. I don't think I've seen many Spellbook decks, in a sense, play this. There have been other decks that are spellcaster variants that will play more of this, just because this card kind of is generic if you have spellcasters. But seeing that is a little different, and then besides that, yeah, nothing's super unheard of in this list. In terms of the side deck, we do see the 3 Crow and the 1 Kaiku again. This build isn't choosing to play the Flying Seas, which I think Flying Sea isn't super normal in the side deck for Spellbook. We see the 1 Dark Hole, 3 MST, and the 1 copy of Dimensional Fissure. And then here they are choosing to also side 3 copies of Breakthrough Skill. This is really good into the Artifact Trap Tricks matchups, simply because this card having the graveyard effect for your turn in order to negate the morale tax and different stuff is extremely good. 2 copies of Rivalry and the 1 copy of Soul Drain. Now, in terms of the extra deck, they're choosing to play the Armored Kappa, which this I would say is extremely standard. We also now see 2 copies of Downward Magician. This card's always really good, just being able to kind of stack on top of your Xyz monsters. It's a spellcaster, it does piercing damage, so that's kind of cool too. And then they're also choosing to play 1 copy of Slacker Magician. I always say how much I like this card. Obviously, it needs 2 level 2s, but it has really high defense, and it has a lot of built-in protection, whether that's from targeting or destruction. This card can be kind of a house to deal with, and for the commitment of, level 1 monsters, it is really cool to see that. But other than that, this extra deck for Spellbook is somewhat irrelevant in some cases, where it doesn't come up as much as in, obviously, other decks that would utilize it more, simply because a lot of times you are kind of playing just a control game with your main deck. But anyways, let's move on to the 5th place list. Now here we have the last deck list, which is again just a kind of a pure Geargia list, and this was the player again that won the H.A.T elimination, if I remember correctly, my bad. And they played this deck kind of different from what I would consider a standard list, so I guess this event had 2 very unstandard Geargia lists actually topping. I can't entirely remember if their list is this exact one. Maybe they just ran it back because this event took place basically right after that one. I do remember that from what I said in that video, that they were playing this deck sort of similar to a Geargia Karakuri list, and some of those changes are still here. Obviously, this is the list I was referring to when I said that, it's kind of strange to see Geargia playing like 2 Max C and 1 Crow. Actually, let me look back at that first place list. They were playing 2 Crow and 1 Max C. So this one's actually kind of the opposite, just playing 1 Crow and 2 Max C. But again, from their last time they played this deck, I definitely remember them playing 3 Soul Charge and 2 copies of Trap Stun and 3 Upstart, because that's usually the lineup that, that Geargia Karakuri would play. So it's kind of interesting to see that. And then here we do see the 3 copies of Fiendish Chain and 2 copies of Breakthrough that I told you that usually Geargia would play. In terms of that, I think everything else looks pretty straightforward. For their side deck, that's again something I don't entirely remember. I'm pretty sure they were on the 1 Needle Ceiling and the 1 Needle Ceiling in the side. So this might again just be the list that they used the last time. I don't entirely remember. They're on the 1 Cycle Reader, the extra copy of Crow, and the extra copy of Max C, the extra MST, and then obviously the Dimensional Fissure is extremely normal. 2 copies of Blackhorn, 2 DNA Surgery, and 2 Debunk. That's all very standard in the side deck for Geargia. And then here we see 2 copies of Full House. I don't remember seeing this card, but it is extremely good against any of the decks that are just going to be setting a lot of back row. Or lately, there's been a lot of like tanky decks and stuff like that, whether that's Bujin or the Fire Fist, and this card can really punish those decks as well. In terms of the extra deck, they are on the Karen Gorgon, which is a little bit different, but it's, again, not super unheard of. It's more of a personal preference in a lot of cases, though they are still playing the copy of Ragna Zero. So they aren't playing any Cowboy or Heartland Draco, so that's like the big thing. And I do remember this, they were playing the copy of Levier, which is very weird for Geargia. But, you know, it worked out for them in that event, and obviously in this event, it also somewhat did, being able to get 5th place, which in a weird way is kind of weird to have 5 deck lists shown off for, you know, only 16 players entering, but not going to complain to show off more deck lists for you guys. But yeah, everything else looks very straightforward here. They are playing that Acid Golem that I mentioned, and the Soul of Silver Mountain, which is extremely normal for this deck. But yeah, no, everything looks good here. So anyways, that is it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like on it. Comment any questions or videos you want to see in the future. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified anytime I put a new video out. Share this video with your friends, and what was the most interesting part of this event for you guys? Let me know in the comment section. But anyways, guys, I will see you in the next video.